Oh. Let's call the meeting to order for the B&G meeting to order. Do we have a quorum?
Yes, we have a quorum.
Fantastic. Good. I'm pleased to report that we've already taken care of all the issues, and so we'll just tell you what we decided. No, I'm kidding. All right. Let's go with the, first of all, are there any non-agenda public comments? I don't see any. Okay, great. New business. Let's start with the review of the of insurance covering SDCERS. I believe
Thank
that's
you. Good morning, Thanasi. This
Morning, John.
item, we will review the insurance covering SDCERS, and the second part of that is renewal of a fiduciary insurance. I brought with me the brokers for SDCERS who've been working with us since 2010, John Niedenhofer and David Williams. Thank you, gentlemen.
Is the 2010 comment a sales pitch, or is it just to insulate them from the committee? What's the point of that?
It gets to show their breadth of experience with us and
Okay,
my
gotcha.
personal satisfaction. So I'd like you to drive the PowerPoint since I don't have the power to do so here. But the first part of this presentation, I want to educate the committee again on insurance covering SDCERS, discuss purchasing additional types of insurance if you desire, and then John and David will take over the fiduciary insurance renewal. Okay, before I talk about this slide, I think it's important for the trustees to understand SDCERS' relationship with the City of San Diego. Now, you know we have autonomy in terms of what we invest in, our benefits administration, but we are a component of the City of San Diego. We're a department. SDCERS' staff are city employees, and essentially all the assets that we administer are assets we hold in trust for our plan sponsors. So ultimately, any loss that SDCERS suffers is borne by the plan sponsors. So within that context, I think it'll help understand how SDCERS and other pension systems like us approach insurance. On the screen here are the insurances that potentially cover SDCERS that are purchased through the City of San Diego.
Johnny, I don't mean to
Yes.
interrupt you, but just for clarity, you said that we hold this in trust for the plan sponsors, but we also hold it in trust for the employees. And if there was a loss, it would be borne by both parties, correct?
Yes,
Okay, I just want to make sure we're...
I think that's a very good point. Thank you for that. I just tried to make the distinction that SDCERS doesn't have any of its own personal assets such that it wouldn't be reflected in the loss of a reduction of a trust fund to either pay benefits to employees or to cover the plan sponsors' liabilities. So the City of San Diego purchases several insurances, the four of which relate to SDCERS. If something would happen with an SDCERS employee, they have workers' compensation through the City of San Diego. The City of San Diego has a combination of self-employed and a policy for general liability, property liability, and master crime policy. This arrangement that we have with the city, meaning SDCERS doesn't purchase its own standing insurances for this, is consistent with what other plan sponsors do, other retirement systems do with their plan sponsors. Slide 4, I want to talk about the one insurance that SDCERS has purchased historically, which is fiduciary insurance. To understand why we buy it, I got to give you a little background. So by statute, the City of San Diego has to indemnify its employees for defense and indemnity for any actions that the trustees or employees do in their normal course of business. In the early 2000s, though, despite promises and this state law requiring it, the City Council voted to not indemnify SDCERS trustees for their actions related to approving Manager's Proposals 1 and Manager's Proposals 2. Now, years later, through litigation, the trustees' defense costs were paid for, but that was a tough time period. And so since 2007, this board has decided to purchase its own fiduciary insurance to avoid relying on the City Council for their vote on that. With that, I do want to add, we'll talk about fiduciary insurance and the renewal process with John, but we don't have any recommendations right now for any other insurance. We haven't really we haven't asked the broker to really go in depth and explore our exposure, so if that's something we want to do, we could explore that as well, but right now we don't have any recommendations to buy other insurance. Questions on that before we hand it over to John and David? Thank you. Could you switch the next PowerPoint, please? If they do, yeah.
Good morning.
Green is go.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm John Niedernhofer, and this is my colleague, David Williams. We're with Marsh McLennan Agency, formerly known as Barney & Barney. We've been serving as your broker for, I believe, 7 years. This morning, I want to talk about the fiduciary insurance that we handle for you. There are several different types of names that speak to this type of insurance broadly. In other contexts outside of pension trustee environments, it's fundamentally similar insurance to what's widely known as D&O insurance. Fiduciary liability insurance is also referred to as pension trustee liability insurance. So we're going to talk this morning about some of the coverage features, how the coverage works and is structured, a summary of the renewal process, an evaluation of the different options for the renewal, which is December 14, and what that recommendation to management is, who in turn I expect will be making a recommendation to you all. Within your insurance that we manage, there are 3 components. The next page is a graphic depiction of it, and I'll toggle back and forth between these a bit. Through industry custom, it has 3 labels, if you will, 3 different types of coverage features, and all insurers describe it in the same way. Side A is the one that is most meaningful for the situation in the mid-2000s that Johnny described a moment ago. If there is a demand for indemnification by an insured person which is not met, this insurance with no deductible will defend and indemnify an insured person, which is a trustee and select executive officers of SDCERS. The much more common type of exposure insured under this policy is what we call Side B, which is allegations of personal liability of trustees or management members, which can be and is indemnified, and the insurance reimburses SDCERS or the city for its indemnity obligation. And if SDCERS as an organizational entity is targeted in a claim, there is what we call Side C coverage, which will defend the organization and all employees without regard to whether they're a trustee or an executive officer. Both Side B and C have a sizable deductible to them, $1.5 million. We call it a retention because the functional difference is with a retention you get to control defense versus deductible you surrender control of the defense to an insurance company. Are there any questions so far? You will see there's also this green box on the upper left depicts a different flavor, if you will, of Side A. So your insurance is built into 3 layers. There's a primary, an excess, and then an additional excess. That topmost excess is A side only, but it has a feature called DIC. It's another industry jargon acronym. I apologize. It stands for difference in condition, and what that most meaningfully means to you all on the top right column there, the first bullet, is if there is a demand for indemnification that is not met, or if one of the underlying insurers does not respond to a claim, that topmost layer will drop down as primary with no deductible and defend a trustee who has an indemnity demand that has not been met, whether it's through the city, bless you, through the city or SDCERS that doesn't respond. Any questions? Management asked us this year to
John, do we have a special endorsement or rider for Tanasi?
And along those lines, I noticed that you refer to it as DIC insurance, and you don't run that together. I just think that's kind of interesting, but that's okay. It's fine. It's fine. Whatever, it's fine.
Now you understand my request?
I'm just trying to illustrate your point, that's all. Go ahead.
I will, I'll treat that question as asked and answered. The coverage, in a broad sense, you can see how the coverage is structured. It responds to loss, defined as damages, defense costs, judgments, and settlements, which the insureds, or defined persons, are legally obligated to pay as a result of a claim made during the policy period. Fairly simple, but the art is all in the definitions and then the exclusions. Our role as the broker is to expand the breadth of the definitions as maximally as possible and to narrow the exclusions as much as possible. The key exclusions that we, in discussion with management, bless you, in discussion with management felt most pertinent to discuss today are the most commonly encountered in this environment. They're usually when there is a claim against a trustee, there is an allegation of fraud and sometimes even criminal acts. The key there is the coverage, because that seems to be a given. If there's a claim, there's going to be an allegation of completely inappropriate conduct. The coverage will respond and indemnify and defend that targeted individual up until such time as the allegation is proven, and proven by a final and non-appealable judgment. And not only that, it's a judgment in the underlying action, so the case itself. So, for example, the insurance will continue. If there is a lawsuit against the trustees and there is a separate criminal proceeding against one of the trustees that actually finds guilt, that is not in the underlying proceeding. That's a collateral proceeding. So if anything, the insurance may be annoyingly broad when you have a bad actor established, but the purpose for us as the broker is not to reach a subjective decision on where we feel the insurance should stop. It's to build it as broadly as possible for the protection of the individuals who are serving this organization. And we don't value judge at what point it should be cut off. Are there any questions on that part? That's, I think, the most pertinent exclusion. Other exclusions are primarily designed around things which other insurance is intended for. Bodily injury and property damage would be things that you think of, like general liability, premises liability, things like that. Workers' compensation, disability discrimination, those are subjects of different insurance, and this insurance would not respond to those type of allegations. The other thing, the next two bullets, the last two on this page, both important. This insurance does not replace an obligation owed, either by the members to SDCERS, if there's an undercollection and you pursue it and there's litigation as a result. The cost of that litigation to defend it would be borne by the insurance, and if there are damages associated with it, but the amounts due to SDCERS by the members themselves, this is not a funding mechanism for something that members are supposed to pay and required to pay and fail to pay. Similarly, the opposite. If there are benefits owed by SDCERS and there is litigation and it is established that the benefits were not paid and should have been, the benefits themselves will not be borne by the insurance. That would be an SDCERS obligation, but the litigation costs, legal fees, and any damages that flow out of this would be subject to the insurance.
John, is in that case, is there a retention amount or no retention amount?
There would be a retention amount in any instance unless there is personal liability of trustees which cannot be indemnified.
Okay.
So invariably that would be a yes answer unless an extreme circumstance, well, unfortunately, which is similar to one you've been through about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. But the common example, yes, would be subject to a sizable deductible retention. We do have different options for different levels of retentions we can discuss.
So if there's a dispute over whether or not the liability can be indemnified, and the indemnitor, in this case the city or some other policies, denies an obligation to indemnify, then this insurance would provide a defense, even though the insured may be saying that it can be indemnified, but it would be under the green box, the DIC, not under the.
Correct. This layer right here that I'm dragging the cursor across, the Side A DIC that you're speaking to in green, would drop down, and it would serve as an advocate for the insured person who has made an indemnity obligation. There is something throughout all of this insurance which is called presumptive indemnification, so that you don't have a whimsical, well, if we withhold indemnification, we can save a deductible. If it is perceived by the trustee, who's the insured person, as an example, and the insurer, then there would be a disagreement that would be pursued about whether or not an indemnity is owed. Is that responsive?
Yeah, I mean, it's the situation that did occur where I think trustees believed there was an obligation on the part of the city to indemnify. The city took a position that there wasn't. And in that circumstance, the trustee doesn't get Side A coverage. The trustee gets Side A DIC coverage.
That is correct. It could be either if the primary was triggered. This also, so the primary would probably be triggered there with no deductible, and the DIC would drop down if and only if there was an exclusion, because the underlying insurance may have broader exclusions than the DIC. The DIC is very skinny on exclusions, if you will. There are more traditional exclusions for things like environmental and just more common industry war, just generic exclusions that don't exist in the DIC layer. I don't think any of those exclusions would be applicable to the prior circumstance. So as a practical matter, the way I envision this insurance, whether it's the Side A or the Side A DIC, would have responded in that instance. If there was a trustee that made a demand for indemnification, it was not met, counsel would be hired by the insurer for the trustee to defend the litigation against the trustee and also affirmatively pursue the indemnity obligation and litigate that as necessary on behalf of the trustee.
But does Side A DIC have any obligation to settle to settle the claim?
Yes, it has an absolute obligation to the insured person to protect them through defense and indemnity if it can be resolved.
And the limits are the same as the Side A?
Correct. So let's have a quick look. This is your existing insurance program here on the leftmost column. I skipped to the end, as you may have noted. This is your existing, so 2016 to 2017, this expires in about 5 weeks. So you have $25 million of what is Side A throughout this program. If it's a pure Side A loss, unless it's excluded under RLI, it would be covered under that layer. When it's exhausted, the next layer Chubb would kick in, and then you have an additional A-side layer. If for some reason RLI did not respond to the claim for a demand for indemnification by an insured person, Hudson, the Side A DIC layer, would drop down, first dollar, defend that trustee, and do 3 things. It would defend the trustee in the underlying litigation, and it would pursue indemnity, and it would pursue RLI for their response. So it's a very broad feature, that drop-down feature, the DIC feature. It will advocate on behalf of the insured person on 3 fronts. Does that make sense?
Does I have a question for you? How does Hudson select the lawyer that defends the trustee, or does the trustee have discretion in who they use?
The trustee, the insured person in any of this coverage, has the ability to select counsel, and the insurer must consent, but consent will not be unreasonably withheld.
Okay. And is there a cap on rates or fees or anything of that nature?
It's negotiated.
Okay.
Usually the insurer wants to get involved in the rate setting because they can bulk buy, and they're more experienced in negotiating and understand people who are competent in this field. This is a very niche field of litigation, and because they are very prominent in the field, you've got strong alignment of interests and they want to help. So they want to make sure there's competency and that the rates are appropriate. So they do assist in this, but they consent if there's competency and rates are appropriate.
Because I believe Chubb uses a nonprofit firm out of LA for this market, and so they actually select the firm, and they actually have a firm in place for that. Is that correct?
It depends entirely on the type of insurance. For example, employment practices liability insurance, they have a panel of various law firms that are experienced in labor and employment law from which you can select, and that it is an adhesion contract where you have to select counsel. This is very different, where you as a trustee get to select counsel at your discretion, and they must approve it. But it's very rare.
And you're saying it's also true for Chubb in this case?
Yes, so that is a really good point that I should elaborate on. The way this coverage is structured, RLI as primary sets all the terms and conditions. We negotiate the scope of coverage with RLI. Chubb is what we call follow form excess. So they are a percentage of the underlying price, and for that percentage, they add additional limit, and they follow the underlying terms and conditions. So if RLI accepts a claim as covered, Chubb is bound by that.
Yeah. Okay.
Same as counsel selection.
Then, Asi, to your point, RLI approved Dave Noonan in our representation for overpayment cases. So
And I think we all know where that led, didn't it? No, I'm just kidding.
So that's counsel we chose and that the insurer did approve.
So let me back up a bit and talk about, so that graphic depiction that you just looked at, this is...
Actually, before you jump along, I hate to do this, but when we deal with fraud and whatnot coverage, I understand we're talking about different coverage than in here because we're talking about it's excluded for trustees. Do we have coverage for that for staff? Fraud, theft, whatever. I'm not saying our staff would do that. I'm just asking, do we have?
You mean for embezzlement or something like
Right.
that? We don't have a standalone policy, but the city has purportedly covers us as employees under their master crime policy.
So we are covered under the city's master crime policy.
That's what they've said. Yes.
Have we ever verified that?
I think it would be difficult for me to analyze their policy and their coverage, but it's something I can look into and try to give you a better answer.
I just like to know if we have coverage. Either the city has affirmatively told us, yes, you guys are covered for that.
They have.
Okay. All right. Sorry, go ahead.
No worries. This is and that's an important question because that's a very obvious exposure in this arena, and there are statutory obligations to make sure there is coverage in place, but we've discussed that with Johnny, and the city has represented that affirmatively, that you aren't insured under their policy. This is just a narrative that describes the same thing we just looked at on the leftmost column of that bar chart. To describe the renewal process, starting about 90 days before expiration, we approach all viable insurers that can offer this type of coverage, whether primary or excess, pure A side or otherwise. And we shop it, and we ask them to put their best foot forward, and then we select some of the better options and negotiate coverage enhancements, price reductions, different retention options. Our renewal recommendation, and I'll go back to the graphic.
Before you do your recommendation, just another quick question. Most brokers can't sell the universe of companies out there. What are you limited to? Who are we missing by not talking to a different broker, or are we missing anything?
You are not missing. We have access, either direct or indirect, through wholesale markets to every viable insurer in the marketplace.
Thank you.
Certainly. In this area, there are no markets that require a wholesale appointment, so we have direct access to all viable markets for fiduciary liability insurance. So in looking at these different options, this page right here describes what you see on the following page in a graphic depiction. We are recommending either option 1 or option 2, depending on management and your committee's discretion on whether you feel a change of deductible is appropriate. Net, you see down here, $25 million. For the same coverage features, there are no negative changes to coverage, and there are very minor enhancements that we've negotiated to the positive in coverage the price is dropping approximately for same retentions, fundamentally same coverage, same insurers. The price would drop approximately $80,000 versus prior year, which is what we've got depicted here in option 1. In option 2, this represents a $1 million retention, so functionally reducing the deductible by $500,000. And the difference, to toggle back to the prior page, you would still see a premium reduction versus expiring, but it would be a much more modest premium reduction at approximately $48,000 of reduced premium versus $80,423 if we left that retention at $1.5 million. Any questions so far? A third option is to replace RLI and Chubb with Hudson, and we would need to build an alternate insurer above Hudson for Side A DIC, and that is something we can do in a matter of hours. That's already preset. We have several waiting in the wings. So the price is known at $25,000, and we would probably just pick whoever had the highest capital rating and claim-paying behavior. The reason we do not recommend this program, so the difference, you should compare option 2 and 3 because they both have a $1 million deductible. There's a $20,000 additional incremental savings, which we do not recommend you capture because Hudson is a fairly new entrant to this industry. And they have been your A-side insurer. They've been very long-term in that, but they've just finished drafting their own primary policy form. And this is the first year that they can offer primary coverage. And we just simply do not have visibility into claim-paying track record. Contrast that to RLI and Chubb are the two industry leaders with the highest market share in the space, a well-established claim-paying reputation, a lot of time in business, and they've also been, RLI are the ones that, when we were first retained 7 years ago, came in and agreed to restructure coverage for a significant price decrease and radically improve and broaden coverage. So we would recommend that you not elect the Hudson option 3 and instead look to options 1, which is same as expiring for an $80,000 decrease, and option 2 for a $48,000 decrease versus expiring, but with a lower retention. Any questions?
So, question for you. I assume when you mean Hudson has no claims paying history, that's based as a primary, but they do as a Side A DIC covered?
Correct on both points.
Okay. And I guess the question I feel I need to ask is there a difference in terms of compensation to you guys along any of these different recommendations?
Good question.
And I don't
No.
need to know the amount. I just want to know if there's a difference.
No, it's set by the insurers, and I believe they're all the same. David, correct?
It's the same, yeah.
Actually, it's not the same. It's the same as a percentage of premium. So we would be paid modestly less as you move further to the right.
Aha!
Yeah, you're. So it's 15%, I believe, of any of these options.
And between the $1.5 million versus $1 million retention, do you have an opinion?
I have an opinion that I'd like management to speak to it.
Well, I'd like to hear your opinion before my
Sure, I'll take that one, John. John and I discussed this, and it really is a preference for premium versus retention. SDCERS has, since 2007, we've never made a claim for which the insurer has paid out. So one could say maybe our retention's too high, or maybe it's just not something we've used because we've been able to avoid that high stakes litigation. So it's hard to say which one to choose. I actually asked the broker to provide us with a quote for a lower retention just so you could see an option for that.
And one way to look at it is the savings between options 1 and 2, I believe, were, what, $33,000? So 48,000, 32,000, don't trust my math. 48 versus 80. And I would look at that in the following way. If you amortize that savings and present value it, what's the propensity to be sued above $1 million for a covered claim? You know, it's probably 13, 14 years. Are you going to have a covered claim above 1 million but below 1.5 before you can monetize that delta of 500,000 between the retention options, is how I look at it. And what do you feel subjectively is the likelihood of that event occurring? That's how I would analyze it. And there's so much that goes into that, what's going on in the industry, how your members look at things. Are you changing plan design? Are you changing advisors, fiduciary counsel? What's your risk profile, up, down? What are your returns? I think looking at all those things leads me to be agnostic in net answer, because I just, I feel that is something that you have a much deeper insight about propensity to litigation above 1 million over the next decade plus, and monetize the cost of dropping the deductible down.
John, our premium drops annually, in my view, because the risk is overestimated by the insurance industry for this particular system, and has been for years. And there is what I'm going to call a bias against SDCERS based on some history that really has no application except perhaps to reduce risk in the current era. And as a result, I think our members have paid hundreds of thousands of dollars in excess of what would be a fair premium in a perfect world. I see that coming down, which is gratifying. When will it be normal?
That's an excellent point. You do have the dubious distinction of being the iconic example nationally of the merit and use and validity. So what you as a system went through 12 and 13 years ago caused hundreds of other systems to purchase this insurance, sadly.
We should
And
be
you think
getting,
we
we
get
should, we should
benefit?
be getting a refund for
Exactly.
that. But anyway, setting all that aside,
And-
it's been good for you, it's been good for the carriers, it's been bad for our members or our sponsors because it's a cost to us. And I think I would love to have been selling insurance to SDCERS for the last 7 years. I could retire, but here we are. So this $80,000 drop in the same coverage is nice to see. We're getting back to where maybe we're paying closer to what I would consider to be a fair rate. But I still think that there are similarly sized systems out there who would be paying less because they don't have the brand, the red letter brand that we got. Over time, I expected that to dissipate, and I think that's what's happening.
Yes.
But where are we on the curve?
Yeah, you're nearing peer appropriate, and you're way closer than you were. And quite frankly, it's the further in the rearview mirror that bad event disappears.
Can we make a case to an insurance company directly, either through you or preferably even directly, to say, this is the best managed pension system in the state and maybe in the country, in part because of that ancient experience, and we should have a little more competition for our business and not be paying anything more than the going rate?
Mm-hmm. That is at the core and essence of what we do each year. We work with management to go through all of your publicly available information about returns, about advisors, about use of fiduciary counsel, about good governance, about all the
You
things.
have a built-in conflict. Being a lawyer, you're a lawyer too, but I often have built-in conflicts. Mm-hmm. You have a built-in conflict. You make the case, and I don't doubt you make it as best as it can be made. But the fact is, you get paid more to the extent that they reject your case.
Fair point.
So what I'd like to do is know whether can we do anything ourselves to try and get this through to people, or is it really a waste of our time?
Yeah, I don't think it's a waste of your time. The silver bullet answer to this is we have on 2 occasions, once about 6-7 years ago, and once 2 years ago, I believe, I'd need to check the timing, affirmatively and aggressively sought a comfort position from the city attorney's office, reaffirming the indemnity obligation that's statutorily there. And they've been equivocal, is how I would describe it.
So we have a new city attorney from a different political party than the prior city attorney. I wonder whether it would make any difference if we could try that again before we commit to a number and maybe try and get this even lower.
Yes, what I would suggest, since we have about 40 days roughly until expiration, is if that's enough time, we could pursue that, and that may be a very powerful data point that will impress underwriters to reprice this lower. And that is something that we have recommended and pursued in conjunction. I've gone to meetings.
I also want to point out, we're not talking about a huge amount of money here in this premium, but we oftentimes tell people bad news about their own situations in retirement over far smaller dollars than this. And we struggle with that because it's so hard to tell somebody, I'm sorry, but you have to pay the system back the $565 that you owe. So we can hardly be doing that on one hand and then ignoring the fact that, we have an opportunity to lower our premiums by maybe $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 if people understood our story, or we
Right.
could get the city attorney to help us.
We have done conference calls with underwriters, with management explaining these things. We've gone through the code section that requires indemnity. We've provided that. We've done our homework in that regard, and until we get a more comforting position from the city attorney's office, it is going to be annoyingly incremental to you as the buyer. And I do want to comment on the conflict. There is a conflict. I'm a bit torn as a taxpayer, as a community member. I'm active in the field of governance. I applaud people volunteering an enormous amount of time for public good, and I'm motivated. And so our responsibility is to build the broadest available coverage to motivate people to serve in a capacity in which otherwise they may feel the risk is uncomfortably great and choose to not to. And that would be demotivating to me personally if we weren't able to accomplish that. And also as a professional, the last thing I want is a reputation for not doing the best possible job at the lowest possible price. And that's a long-term view by our firm and by us as individuals. And so,
As I say, I get put in the same position you're in. I understand. I have complete faith and confidence in you. It's just that we're in a system that is what it is.
And so what we could do to divorce the conflict would be to establish a fee and eliminate the commission so that, we are paid an agreed amount no matter what the premium outcome is. That's one approach that we've discussed periodically with management. But based on the trend line, when we took this over,
The trend line is in our favor. I understand that. And I'm not suggesting we reconfigure and try and eliminate the conflict. I just want to make sure that it's clear we understand it. Is there anything we can do directly or in some other way? And I think you've answered my question.
yes, I think we're doing as much
as we can.
as can be done.
Right. Yeah, as between the options, since you asked us a question, I would prefer to continue at a $1.5 million deductible and save the additional dollars. And in part, that's because of my personal judgment of the likelihood that we're going to suffer a claim that falls within that $1 million to $1.5 million range. And I just think that we should go for the lower premium at this point. I think we're a very safe system. I think we do things right. And I have a high level of confidence in things here. So I would go with the $1.5 million deductible. Or retention, and I'm a little bit torn between options 2 and 3, notwithstanding that there isn't a long history for Hudson in the Side A space. That's really my only debate internally.
Right, the lowest cost option
But
is
lowest
the
cost
1.
is 2, so I don't get there. So I'm
Well, but if you bid Hudson at a $1.5 million deductible, it would probably be
might get
cheaper
lower.
than 2.
Yes, I think, David, I don't know if you got that option, but I think the total is somewhere in the $235,000 range.
So the reason that that's relevant to me is if Hudson is rated high enough for them to be a viable option, and you have been recommending them for a few years on the DIC coverage, it seems to me like it's a little bit, and I appreciate it, they're a new entrant into the primary.
Were they
but-
always just a stalking horse, is what you want to know?
Yeah, but from my perspective, I'm not sure that. I mean, it's hard for me to hear a presentation that says they're good enough to provide your DIC coverage, but I don't know that I want them to provide your principal coverage, because then it would kind of. I mean, to me, I think whoever we're choosing should be good enough to cover us from $1, whoever that is. Otherwise, they shouldn't be recommended. So that's just a comment that I'd be interested to hear if you have any comments. Second issue is, what is the difference between what similar systems are paying today versus what we're paying? Because I'm curious, is the difference 5,000, 50,000, 100,000? And then the third piece, just because I want to make this as difficult as I can for you.
I'm going to take some notes.
Exactly.
The problem, John, is our next meeting starts at 11 and it's only 10 after 10.
Yeah, exactly. So the and I actually forgot my third point. Son of a gun. That's great. Don't worry, I'll think of it before you finish your first two responses. It's okay.
John, our meetings are recorded. You can watch the video of this if you want to take notes later.
I don't anticipate I will, but thank you.
Shocker.
So back to the first question. Hudson has been for probably close to 15 or 16 years an A-side insurer in all types of A-sides, so D&O, fiduciary liability, pension trustee liability, and they innovated the product. They narrowed the exclusions. They were a market leader. They built up relationships with, there are subtle differences in counsel selection where indemnity is elusive versus just defending a pension system. And so there's a different expertise in their counsel relationships. Am I trying to suggest that they're not appropriate and unqualified? I'm not at all suggesting that. I just know I have a high degree of comfort with RLI and Chubb, and I don't have the same degree of comfort because of lack of track record in similarly situated circumstances.
And that's good enough. That answers my question on that
But
issue.
that's a $20,000 difference, and I can't quantify, my comfort is, as a buyer, I can't imagine my comfort's worth $20,000, so I get your point. But it's borne by experience. I come from the claim end of the business. I was in the claims end for a very long time and involved in lots of coverage litigation where insurers challenge a coverage position, and it's an unfortunate just part of, they've got duties to their stakeholders and they've got to make sure claims are covered before they pay them. So I'm very sensitized to track records and claim paying behavior, and I know what that is with RLI and I know what that is with Chubb. On the primary, I don't know to the same degree, but Hudson, they're under a contract, and that contract is fundamentally equivalent to RLI's, and I'm comfortable. We can stand behind it and represent it.
I appreciate that. I did remember my third question, which is, normally I tend to see experience affecting premium for 5 years. This one seems to, and I'm not an expert. I certainly don't do what you do. This one seems to have been affecting us 12 years. And so I'm trying to figure out why it seems to be disproportionately affecting us longer than sort of the average. I mean, if you take the average E&O policy that gets hit out there in the general public, you're going to pay increased premiums for 5 years. It's going to be a mess. And then after that, you're going to drop into some normality. Here we're well beyond the 5 years. And I understand it's coming down, but Jesus. See, you brought in religious, you're agnostic, I'm bringing in Jesus. It's all about God. That's fine, whatever.
So I'm going to address that one before I go back to the difference on price versus other systems, which was your second question. It is our understanding, you first bought this insurance as a burning building, so to speak. That's the euphemism. You were the iconic example of an insurance that has rarely historically been tested. And so the claim propensity for not just a claim, against a system, but an A-side loss where indemnity was declined, that was an anomaly. It had never occurred before, to my knowledge. And that is the time where you first purchased insurance 9 years ago. And then there was a claim brought against that insurance. It was not paid. We were asked by management to audit the policy and comment on the appropriateness of the coverage denial by the insurer in place. And I can't speak to why the coverage was so narrow and so expensive. It was approximately $700,000 and it had a full prior act exclusion. And by definition, every claim you ever confront has
Sounds like
prior act.
an illusory $700,000 contract.
And I don't want to speak to that because that's a competing broker that structured that, but we were brought in, asked to comment on it. Coverage counsel, you retained, recommended we be retained to restructure coverage. We added B and C coverage, we added full prior acts coverage, and we reduced the price and increased the limit all at the same time. So we've been adding value since then, but that was, I believe the litigation was still going on at that point. I don't recall exactly.
No,
but,
and I'm not, I want to be really clear. I'm not discounting what your efforts. I'm just saying if we bought it 9 years ago, okay, and if the average runtime on that is 5 years, we're almost double that. And we're
Yes.
not back to normality. Is that what's going on? Because I think that kind of goes back to Val's point, which is, hey, what is the problem? We've been good boys ever since.
Well, and we've restructured the way the board is composed now. I mean, I would think a higher risk system would be one where you don't have the wonderful combination of elected and appointed members of the board that you have here. It's such a totally different and better system than the ones that are getting charged lower premiums.
So the easiest way I can answer this is when you talk about E&O claims or D&O claims, there are probably, for publicly traded companies, somewhere in the range of 500 or 600 D&O claims against, brought by shareholders or derivative claims against boards of directors, fundamentally in the same footing as you all, with their fiduciary duties to the stakeholders. And that's a large body of claims annually. And very few of those have an A-side component. And the ones that have, and so organizations that have a high A-side risk, meaning they may have an insolvency problem because the ability to indemnify may not be met because of solvency questions, or because indemnity may be elusive because there are mechanisms that call into question the quality of the indemnity certainty. Switch to your industry, and you are the only textbook example that is still discussed by all the underwriters in the space. So it's still fresh in mind compared to other industries is unfortunately because it was such a stark anomaly. And so the institutional memory is longer and starker amongst underwriters.
But presumably you mentioned the runtime on this to the
Oh,
carriers.
absolutely.
I mean,
it's getting ridiculous. I mean, how far in the rearview mirror does it have to be? Is now what that ends up turning into is negotiations with alternate insurers like Hudson, like ACE, like ACE is now part of Chubb, but XL. There are a number of competing insurers where we pitch this story independently and separately to alternate underwriters to say the price is excessive, it should be more normalized.
But then is that the argument that maybe we need to go to a Hudson or somebody else because maybe the Chubbs of the world and the RLI keep doing this because they feel there's no competition out there? If we move away from them, it seems to me that they might have to rethink their bid process.
Right, and so we do exactly what you describe in principle, and we do it separately to Hudson. And so RLI knows Hudson is very aggressive in this space now as a primary insurer for the last 12 months or so. And so RLI aggressively cut premium more than they'd first indicated and negotiated it down because we told them the delta was too high and the recommendation would clearly be to move to Hudson because they just were not competitive. So those dynamics take place over a several month period, and we use data, we use information to try and drive that price down. And I believe we're at the floor for this year based on the information at hand. Are there other mechanisms we could employ? Yes, we can and will, but we talk about the fact that this is a well-managed system.
John, I don't mean to cut you off. We've been going almost an hour on this. The last component that I asked was, what's the difference in premium between if we were back to baseline, what would it be, ballpark?
So I need to get back to you. I will respond back. David and I will analyze this and get back with Johnny so that I can be specific. But in general, you're getting a lot closer to what the average would be.
Delta being 20, 30 grand?
No, I'd say, well, because you've got to look at assets under management, investment returns, underfunding delta, and rate of close of that, actuarial assumptions on returns. You've got to look at how much limits bought, and normalize for all that. And so what exactly is your peer? So we need to go look at that again. We've done that every single year, and I simply don't have that with me. I want to say, I would speculate you're either high single-digit percentage above what market would be or low double-digit. So teens at the most is, and when you look at how
Suggesting if it was a 10% difference, we could shave
$20,000.
$24,000.
if you, yeah, and to take that several steps further, if you'd never had an event like had occurred in 2004 through or 3 through 7 and the litigation that followed it, you would be at, or you would actually be under that peer level because of all the governance and
Got it.
quality that you've got. But unfortunately, A, you do, and B, right or wrong, we've sensitized the underwriters to the fact that we pursued comfort. You know, we've talked openly with underwriters about, will the city attorney affirm the indemnity obligation? And if that's still elusive, you know, there's going to be some incremental, it's going to dissipate over time, but it's still there.
Okay, thank you.
I
So
want to add one point here. So the last time I asked a question of my peer group at a roundtable meeting, I said, what are you all paying in fiduciary insurance premiums? And at the time, we were at $600,000 a year. And everyone else in the room, the highest was $200,000, and that was for a system that was multiple times bigger than we were.
Right.
Now, they may have less coverage, too. You may know that we have 25 million. We've not always had 25 million, and there are systems that have less, so that could be weighing into it.
okay, all right. So I think we've beat this horse. If anybody, unless somebody has a question for John or for David, let's move this on. So
Thank you, guys.
Absolutely.
now, just for purposes of voting, Val, I tend to agree with you, keeping the option at, let me make sure I've got it correct. I think that's option,
Option 1.
well, option 1 is where you're reducing it, where it stays at the $1.5 million across the board. Okay. So the only thing that I would ask my committee members to consider is, I think I'd like to call for a vote on approving option 1 with the directive to you guys that you go back to the city attorney's office and attempt to get what John says he needs and that you guys have been inappropriately withholding from him.
I guess I should make 2 comments. One, I'm curious if we had the option 1 with coverage with Hudson for $10,000 or $20,000 lower premium, whether we would vote for that, notwithstanding John's lack of track record with Hudson. That's one thing, which it's not, it hasn't been presented. So I think, I might vote for that. Number 2 is I might consider raising the SIR to $2 million if we could get a big chunk of premium reduced for that. And number 3 is, I don't know that I want to give staff the directive that Tanasi's talking about, because I don't know whether that's productive or counterproductive, and I'd rather leave that to staff rather than have us tell them to do it. Those are my 3 thoughts.
That's fine. Charlie, do you have any comments on this?
My biggest concern is to get us, the best deal we can. And having been on the board when all of this stuff started, I still have a little bias against the city, and I really believe that going to the city attorney for a new opinion may be in our best interest in the long term as well as the short term.
I mean, thank you. My concern is that because we have a new city attorney, and you're specifically telling us that it has been the city attorney's opinion in the past that has been sort of dragging this process, I don't know how we cannot go back and ask that question. The worst that can happen is they don't do anything different than they've done in the past. So what's the downside? But that's a different issue, I guess, from that perspective. I will say that I don't.
If you ask and they say no, and that is then reported out, I'm not sure that's a positive. I would think that could affect premiums. Maybe not. If it doesn't, then
Well, let me ask, will it affect premium?
If they decline to opine on it, then no, it will not impact that, because the presumption is, they're going to be potentially difficult when called to the test. And that's what that says with a decline to answer. I can't quantify, because I would imagine if they said yes, we would indemnify, but then I would imagine they're going to have to equivocate. They would have to caveat it. They would have to cite circumstances. So I don't know that you're going to get a satisfactory response from this, because they're going to need to cover the contingencies in that opinion. But again,
Well, let me
I
ask a
don't see
question.
any harm in this.
If you've done it, if it was important to do it in the past, why wouldn't it be important to do it now or in the future?
Agreed.
If the city attorney is open to doing this, it needs to go before council to pass a resolution to explicitly indemnify us. That's what would be necessary to get any traction with the underwriters. That's where it's come into a problem before. The city attorney didn't feel he needed to do it, and he said it's got to go before council.
And I understand that. I'm just trying to figure out, you guys have done it, I think you said twice before. So it was important to do it, or was it?
Well, keep in mind, that's when it was $640,000, and anything that would radically impact premium to divorce you from the historical problem that caused it to be inflated in price. So now, I don't know, I can't quantify the impact any longer. Before I knew it would be huge.
Okay. So maybe it's not really that important at this point. So I guess the real question that you brought up, Val, is, and Charlie, for you, is, would you rather take a shot at Hudson at $1.5 million as primary? Would that be something that would interest you on the vote? Because if we're going to frame the question, let's get to the right question. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I understand their recommendation is based on their comfort level, but in reality, what's our comfort level? And in everything I've heard, and I was looking up online about Hudson as they were talking, everything seems to me that they would be an excellent company to go with if it's going to save us money. The other question, as Val brought up, is what would change our premium if we raised it to $2 million?
So just to interrupt, we can have those options to management early next week for $2 million for each of these insurers, and as well as $1.5 million with Hudson.
I don't know if our timing works if our next meeting isn't for 10 weeks.
Could you give a directive
You
that
could do a not to exceed number right now, explore these two options, something along those
I will
lines.
tell you that I understand what you're saying. I don't see the risk. $2 million would not be a problem for me on a retention, and I'm not sure that going with Hudson wouldn't be a bad thing. I think it probably sends the right message to RLI and Chubb and others out there that, hey, this is enough's enough.
fair enough? And so the directives could be twofold, perhaps. They could be, if the premium savings for Hudson at 1.5 million were more than $10,000 below option one, you would direct management to move in that direction. Or alternatively, if a $2 million retention were more than, David, what do you think? Can I put you on the spot here in terms of what you could negotiate for a $2 million retention? Noting that it's, what is that, $21,000 between 1 and 2, and it's not going to be as significant an increment to go to 2 versus 1.5. What do you think, 15,000 maybe? Is that?
15 to 20, I would say.
Let's be cautious so that we can hit a target, and if it's better, we will get the maximum savings we can negotiated.
John, another option, could it be if we just extend the current policy another month and then come with all the options requested today so they can actually see the numbers?
We can explore that. RLI, Chubb, and Hudson would have to approve extending it on a pro
We don't
rata
have
premium
the time.
basis.
We aren't going to make it. Because if they have to approve it and they don't, or they don't approve it at the current pricing, now what do? We have to call a special board meeting and whatnot, so.
So why don't I then make a motion to purchase fiduciary insurance as recommended by the broker under option 1 unless subsequent investigation by the broker and reported to staff indicates that we can save $15,000 or more by raising the SIR from 1.5 to $2 million, and whether we can save $10,000 or more by using Hudson for our side A, B, and C coverage rather than the Chubb RLI combination.
That's clear to us. Yes,
I think it's clear to you and me, and that's it.
that is clear to us, yes.
I understood it, but poor Cynthia's going to shoot one of us, I think,
For
so.
Johnny.
I've got it, they've got it,
All right.
Johnny's got that.
Yes,
you
we
wanna second
understand
it?
that, and I do think that's achievable.
So we've got a second with Charlie. Can we vote on this?
You can bring up the option that we wrote.
It's there. We're adding Val's stuff, right?
Yes. Val, would you mind putting subject
Subject to cost savings as outlined by broker. Is that too vague, or can we go with that and vote on it and
We can have more specific wording available
For
for
tomorrow.
tomorrow.
Tomorrow, that'd be probably a good idea.
thank
Okay.
Can you see it?
all righty?
Is that good? Val, that's good?
I've made the motion, but I don't have a button to
Okay.
push. There
You
it
can
is.
make it now.
Charlie, I think you seconded it. It doesn't look like it took it. Okay.
Ready to vote? All votes are in.
Thank you, John and David.
Absolutely, and thank you all. I appreciate the attention to this and the vigor with which you discharge your duties.
Thank you.
Yeah, relay that to the carrier, would you?
I'm sorry?
Relay that to the carriers, would you?
Yes.
Ted, I'm going to tell you right now, we're not doing another Johnny, okay? So come on up, but you're going to get fractional time, and that's because you're better than Johnny. So that's why, I know it's not going to be an issue.
About that Tanasi Priolos rider to our policy?
Can we double it? No.
Yeah.
2 items. The first item is staff recommends the approval of the disbursement of the 13th check and Corbett benefit. You have my memo in front of you. Should you have any questions, I'm willing to answer them.
Nope. All right, ready to vote?
Ready to vote? All votes are in.
Ted, thank you. That's how you run a presentation, people. Go ahead.
The second item, staff recommends to approve the 2018 drop interest crediting rates and revise Board Rules 6.10 and 6.4 accordingly. You have my memo. Any questions?
Okay, so I had a question which also happens to be the same question Bobby has on one of them. She could not be here today, so she's asked me to raise that. And then and then she brought up a second one. So specifically going to item 6.A.2, she believes that the $50,000 limit for the controller is too high.
That's a different,
That's the next item.
that's the next
Oh,
item.
do I have
That's
the
not me.
wrong? I'm sorry.
So without
My
further
apology.
discussion,
My apologies. I jumped one. Sorry. Go ahead, Ted. I apologize. Go ahead.
I'll make the motion.
Yeah. Got it.
Ready to vote? All votes are in.
All right. Thank you, Ted. And now we're back to Johnny.
Yeah, of course, you have the problem with my item, so go ahead and tell me what your problem is with it.
Thank you.
I'm kidding. I see Bobby's notes, but go ahead and please explain it.
So the issue that she had raised, which I tend to agree with, is that the $50,000 limit for the controller is too high. And so her recommendation is to have the CEO and the controller sign or break it into smaller parts. For me, I don't think breaking it into smaller parts is going to make a difference. I just think having the controller and the CEO sign would make sense. So that's a recommendation I would throw out to the committee. The second item is number 4 is 6.8.4.
6.8.4i.
4I, yeah, which is, she says the expense operating bank account should be separated from the investing type of accounts, and there should be dollar limits for one signature and larger limits that require 2 signatures on the expense account. I don't know that that's a bad idea. I don't know that she didn't give a recommendation for that, and quite frankly, I didn't catch that before, so it's probably something that we need to have a brief discussion about.
So I haven't spoken with Liza about this. I believe that she'd have a better understanding of what a dollar amount should be for a lesser amount and a greater amount than that. But after this meeting, I will speak with her, and at the full board, I can give you her recommendation as part of the board agenda.
And I shared Bobby's concerns with Ted as well. We just haven't had a chance to analyze them as all. I'm not opposed to the suggestion as to the specific dollar amounts and how we might break it into 2. It will take us a little time to figure out what would our recommendation be there.
So should we just table this and bring it to the full board, take it off the consent agenda, bring it to the full board tomorrow, and you'll have a revised document?
That will work.
Okay. Thank you. Next, staff's recommendation to revise board rules 4.0, 4.10, 4.3, 4.5, 4.6, 4.7. And I feel very confident saying this. I know this is going to be the best, fastest presentation we've had all night, so thank you, Marcel, in advance.
Wonderful. So you want me to take it, Johnny?
Apparently, Thanasi would love you to take it. So
Okay.
please do.
So the first recommendation is to revise Board Rules 4.0, 4.10, 4.30, 4.50, 4.60, and 4.70. All of these changes are to clarify and codify what we are already doing, just to make it a bit clearer in the board rules. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
If there's no question, we're ready to vote.
Ready to vote? All votes are in.
And that passes 3-0. Okay, the next item is number 6, staff's recommendation to revise Board Rule 2.50, contribution rate adjustments for reactivated members and members with reciprocity.
And the same comments, this is to clarify and codify what we are already doing.
Any questions? Great, ready to vote.
Ready to vote? All votes are in.
Okay, that passes 3-0. Item number 7, staff's recommendation to revise Board Rule 3.20, establishing reciprocity.
Thanasi, if you have no problems with this one, I'd like to say this is my item. Otherwise, it's,
Fine, Johnny, go ahead.
we recommend you revise 3.20.
See, thank you. That's awesome. Any questions? Great, ready to vote. See, there you go.
Hope our insurance company doesn't watch this tape.
Ready to vote?
Thank you, Marcel.
All votes are in.
And that vote passes 3-0. Thank you, Marcel. Thank you, Johnny. Okay. So on the no action items, reports on overpayments and reports on categorical correction projects. Any questions? before she sits down? Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to status reports. Again, kind of, it's in the material, everybody's read them. Does anybody have any questions on the committee? Or does staff have any comments that they want to make to augment or change what was in the board material? All right, thank you very much. That takes us to questions and comments. Any questions, comments from the chair, trustees, or staff? I love it when a meeting runs like this. All right, any non-docketed items? Nope, great. Then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.